Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel will be Dr. Brian Tucker with his talk titled, Of Boys' Schools and Men's Colleges, Some Thoughts on Wabash's Mission in the 21st Century. Brian Tucker is a professor of German and current chair of Humanities and Fine Arts at Wabash. An alumnus of the college, Tucker graduated in the class of 1998. He earned graduate degrees from Indiana and Princeton University before returning to join the Wabash faculty. He lived in Crawfordsville on West Main Street for 6 years until the rising cost of Halloween candy forced his family to relocate to Zionsville. Professor Tucker has 2 children whom you will occasionally see roaming around Detchen or playing with the pep band. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Tucker.
Guten Morgen, Wabash. That was pretty good. I think some of you didn't catch what I was looking for there, maybe. So, growth mindset, good start. I think we can do better. So, one more time, listen carefully, please. Guten Morgen, Wabash. Guten Morgen. Feels good, doesn't it? All right, that's all the German that you're going to get today, I promise. There's no more German in the talk. I'm under strict instructions, in fact, not to give this talk in German up here at the lectern. No, it's like Costco up here. I give you a tasty morsel, a delicious little nibble, but if you want more than that, you're going to have to commit to a 15-week supply of German. So, first taste is free. You know where to find me if you want more. I want to thank the Sphinx Club for inviting me. It is always an honor to speak here in the chapel. I have not been great about coming to chapel talks this semester. Please don't tell my pledge trainer that. But I did come a couple weeks ago and heard Artie Akiwa give a talk here in the chapel, and I think that was a mistake because he gave a very good talk and he set the bar pretty high. But I will do my best here. I also want to thank Cooper Jacks for extending the invitation to me. Cooper's taken a lot of classes with me during his time at Wabash. I've asked a lot of him, and he's always come through for me. He's someone who always shows up to class with something to say. So when he asked me to give this talk, I just had to say yes. I hope I've come here with something to say to you as well. I knew right away when I was asked what it was that I was going to talk about for this chapel talk. I didn't have to go through that process of trying to land on a topic because today's chapel fits into a conversation that we've been having here at Wabash over the last week or so, and that's a conversation about how boys and men are struggling in the modern world. It's a conversation that revolves around Richard Reeves' book of Boys and Men, as well as around the talk that he gave here in the chapel just on Monday evening. I enjoyed his talk. I enjoyed reading the book. It's thought-provoking. Of course, it's an important topic for a college like ours, so let me start by saying kudos to President Feller, to Jim Amadon, to the President's Distinguished Speaker Series for bringing Richard Reeves to campus. It's been good for our campus. On Monday evening, Greg Castanis introduced Reeves. It's a great introduction to the speaker and as well as to the topic. And he said something that I took to heart. He said that he hoped Reeves' lecture would be the start of a broader, ongoing conversation here at Wabash. And that's what I hope to contribute to today. I know that guys who are in EQ have been reading and discussing the book. I know there was a faculty workshop with Reeves on Tuesday. Lots of people here have been reflecting on these ideas and thinking about them. So let me say at the outset, I'm not an expert, and I don't mean to put myself out there as one. Don't take my talk as the last word on this topic. I just happen to have the bully pulpit at the chapel this morning, so you get to hear my thoughts. Please take them in the spirit they're offered, right? This is contributing to an ongoing conversation. So my first thought is this. Reeves has written an important and thought-provoking book. He's opened eyes to how young men are struggling in today's world. But when it comes to the future and to long-term solutions, I think there's a lot more to be said from the perspective of single-sex education, from the perspective of a men's college like Wabash. At the talk on Monday, and if you've read the book, you know this too, Reeves presented a lot of evidence for how young men are falling behind, especially in the realm of education. You would have read or you would have heard that girls are twice as likely to have a GPA in the top 10% of their high school class. Boys are twice as likely to have a GPA that puts them in the bottom 10%. Women are more likely to graduate from high school, more likely to attend college, more likely to earn a degree on schedule. So given all that, I was really glad that during the Q&A, my friend and colleague Jane Hardy asked Reeves directly what he thinks about single-sex education now that he's been to Wabash and seen what we do. And he clearly admires the work that we're doing. He clearly appreciates that we're an institution that takes seriously the questions of men's education and men's success, but he didn't express a great deal of enthusiasm for single-sex education. The way he put it, the data are still out, it's inconclusive. There just aren't that many studies out there. The ones we do have, they tend to be outdated. They tend to be from other countries. And no matter what you do, it's hard to disentangle the selection bias inherent in any group that chooses to attend a single-sex institution. That's a fair answer. And I respect Reeves for being cautious, for not wanting to make claims that go beyond the data that he's seen. But I don't think we have to be social scientists about it. I don't think we need to wait for randomized, replicable studies with control groups to conclude that Wabash should at least be part of the solution to this issue that Reeves identifies. I can tell you, I've been here a long time, and I see year in and year out evidence that Wabash offers a transformative liberal arts education, that we're doing good things for young men, and that this institution can be part of the solution. It would have been great if Reeves had stood here in the chapel and said, Wabash is the answer. Or if he'd said that sort of after visiting Wabash, he was no longer worried about the future success of men and boys. That would have been great, but that's not what he's going to do. My point is that we don't have to wait around for a visiting expert to tell us that we have something to contribute on this issue of men's struggles. When it comes to educating and supporting young men, we're our own experts. We've been doing this for a long time, and we know a thing or two about how to do it well. And don't get me wrong, I think Reeves does a really good job of diagnosing the struggles of modern men along multiple axes. I think he makes a strong case for why addressing this problem really matters. But when it comes to the question of what to do about it, I think that's where Wabash should be able to make a contribution from a place of deep institutional experience. We need to be gathering the evidence and making the case that the education we offer has a profoundly positive impact on young men's lives. Maybe the answer is single-sex education, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's something smaller, like pedagogical strategies that are attuned to the strengths and challenges that young men tend to bring to the classroom. Maybe it's about creating a space for male bonding and for enduring friendships. Maybe it's simply a matter of giving men ample opportunities to get involved and be engaged, to put their phones down and do something worthwhile. It could be a lot of different things, but I think it's incumbent on us to tell these stories and to tout the positive outcomes that we're able to achieve. So just as an example of looking at the data, of looking at our own data, Wabash does pretty well when it comes to our 4-year graduation rate, which means the percentage of students in a given cohort who graduate within 4 years. For the cohort that entered in 2016, Wabash had a pretty respectable 4-year graduation rate of 73%. For context, that's better than a lot of other GLCA schools. It's better than IU or Purdue. And if you compare us with the school down the road to the south, the 2016 rates are almost the same. They were just a notch higher. Their 2016 cohort had a 4-year graduation rate of 74.8%. 74.8%. So you look at that, the Danny's beating us by a percentage point or two, and you think, okay, we're doing pretty well. Let's try to do better and catch up with them. But you have to keep this in mind. Reeves tells us and shows us over and over again that there are big disparities between men and women in graduation rates these days. And sure enough, if you break down deposit rate by gender, you find that the women in their 2016 entering cohort graduated within 4 years at a rate of about 82.5%, while for men it was just 65.5%. Or at least a couple of things to say there. First off, this gives us another data point in support of Reeves' argument. In that 2016 cohort, you see a 17-point gap between men and women in terms of 4-year graduation rates. Women entering that year were far more likely than their male peers to graduate on schedule. Second, when you see that men in their 2016 cohort, just to pause, had a 4-year graduation rate of 65.5%, Wabash's all-male graduation rate of 73% suddenly looks pretty good. For the cohort that entered in 2016, men at Wabash were more likely to graduate within 4 years than their male peers at Purdue, IU, Hope, Worcester, Earlham, Allegheny, Albion, Ohio Wesleyan. The list goes on, right? And let me just pause and say, before one of my faculty colleagues tries to corner me at the next faculty reception and talk to me about p-values and regressions and things, I want to say I am aware that what I'm talking about here, this is not sophisticated data analysis. I'm aware that we have small cohorts at Wabash and that these numbers are going to bounce around. Even given that, if you look at the trend lines, you can say that Wabash stacks up well against our peers, against our co-ed peers, when it comes to graduation rates. And some of that gap between women and men gets erased by whatever we're doing here at Wabash. So my bigger point is, there's no shortage of data to show that we're doing something right. And let's try to be more intentional about getting that story out there to the public. Second thought. What it means to be a men's college has changed over time. And what I mean is the rationale or the justification for being a men's college has changed over time. The issue that Reeves outlines, this issue of men and boys falling behind, it has the potential to clarify the purpose and the necessity, maybe even the urgency of what Wabash has to offer. I think it's important to note that Reeves' book doesn't just give us a snapshot of the situation as it stands today, as in, here are the ways in which boys and men are struggling and falling behind today. He couches the current situation in an historical narrative that goes back about 50 years. So the timeline for most of his data runs from about 1970 to 2020. And his point is, in that 50-year period, the gender gap in education has really changed. It's flipped, actually. And that's something that public perception hasn't yet caught up with. In 1972, in the United States, and this is from Reeves' book, so if you read it, sorry for repeating it. In 1972, there was a 13 percentage point gap between men and women in the proportion of bachelor's degrees awarded. The big story, by 2019, the gap was 15 percentage points, but in the opposite direction, with women handily outpacing their male counterparts. So big shifts have been underway. And here's my point today. The way we present the mission of Wabash College, the way we present the value proposition of a Wabash education is necessarily going to look different in an environment where men are not keeping up with women in undergrad education. I mean, what did it mean to be a men's college back in the 19th century when Wabash was founded? Not much, to be honest. Being a men's college basically meant to be a normal run-of-the-mill college because that was the norm, not the exception. The founding of co-ed institutions didn't really happen before 1835, and this phenomenon of institutions that exist switching from single-sex to co-ed status, that isn't really a thing before the 1860s. So it's probable that Wabash was founded as a men's college without a lot of intentional commitment to men's education as a particular or separate thing, because that was just standard operating procedure. Men's education was just education because there was a widespread assumption that most women didn't need and wouldn't benefit from that same level and kind of education. Thank goodness we've left that mentality behind. We can see in the 20th century a period of progress and gender emancipation. I mentioned that single-sex institutions first started going co-ed in the 1860s, but it's really the 1960s when that co-ed shift really accelerates. And that's when Ivy League institutions and elite liberal arts colleges opened their doors to women, in late 60s. And it's not long after that, in the early 70s, when Reeves' story about the gender gap begins. Let's think then about what it meant to be a men's college in the 70s and 80s. That's a time when the country's top colleges and universities have already gone co-ed. It's a time when Title IX has just been passed in order to prohibit gender-based discrimination in education. And it's a time when the culture in general is rightly focused on expanding women's educational opportunities and working toward gender equality. It's just more difficult in that environment to justify the insistence on remaining an all-male institution. How do you rationalize excluding women when women are still lagging behind men in higher education? At some point, it has to seem like stubbornness, like an anachronism, like being a throwback to a bygone era when the rest of the world has moved on. And I'll tell you, it's my impression that Wabash went through a fairly long phase where we were, at least in some quarters, a little bit defensive and a little bit chagrined about still being a men's college. I think during that period, we leaned into our identity as a liberal arts college, and we emphasized all the ways we were similar to our peer institutions. So I think in general, we tried to present ourselves as a high-quality liberal arts college that just happen to be all male. That posture isn't going to work for us in the 21st century. As you might have heard Greg Castanis say on Monday evening, we can't be a men's college incidentally or accidentally. And I think he's right. There has to be an intentionality behind our mission and our identity as a men's college. We're not going to thrive as a liberal arts college that just so happens to be all male. We have to make the case that there's value in being a liberal arts college for men, and there's a reason, a justification for this institution's existence. Folks, the landscape of gender in education has changed radically in the last 50 years. And when Reeves aims to open people's eyes to the ways in which boys and men are struggling in the modern world, that's a fantastic opportunity for us to make the case for Wabash and for our educational mission. This is the current chapter in this ongoing narrative of Wabash College, of who we are, of what we believe in, and what we can accomplish. Of course, we need to continue advocating tirelessly for the value of a liberal arts education. We also need to tell a coherent, compelling story about the purpose of men's education today when young men are increasingly left behind by higher ed. Reeves shows us that the contours of that conversation have been changing. And this is an area, I think, where Wabash could do more to define and differentiate itself within the national dialogue. We do an excellent job of articulating our mission to educate men to think critically, act responsibly, lead effectively, and live humanely. But let's also lean into our mission's focus on educating men. I'd like to see us reframe that aspect of our mission as a unique strength, as something that differentiates us from other institutions. You know, normally one identifies a problem and then slowly over time works to develop an answer or a solution to that problem. But in this case, the order is reversed. Wabash has been here all along. And this issue of young men falling behind has developed. And as it's developed, Wabash looks more and more like an important tool in our toolkit. I think it was Peter Frederick who said that our all-male tradition finally has the potential to be cutting edge. All of this makes me optimistic that we have important work to do as a college as we head into our third century. My third and final thought for today builds on what I've already said. Oh, Cooper Jacks told me you guys would feel cheated if I didn't go for a full hour, so I will try to stretch this out well past noon. So. Now, my third and final thought for today, I'd really like to see Wabash become an institutional thought leader in this area, not only in the realm of single-sex education, but on the topic of men and masculinity more broadly. Because, you know, Reeves isn't alone. People at just about every point on the political spectrum seem to agree that there's something ailing young men these days. But what to do about it? That's the real question, and this is where we're going to get a lot of divergent and, to my mind, not entirely satisfying answers to fill that void. On the one hand, we have the diagnosis that contemporary masculinity has become toxic. Personally, I think it's indisputable that there are unhealthy and unhelpful strains of masculinity in our culture. And before you get excited, there's no pandering here. I'm all in favor of dismantling sexism and patriarchal attitudes and toxic, harmful masculinities. At some level, though, I think that's still a matter of diagnosing a problem without putting forward a positive alternative. It's hard work to deconstruct toxic masculinity. It's even harder work to construct a more positive form of masculinity to take its place. I have to say, though, and this is where I might lose you, I'm even more allergic to the conservative idea that the solution is to revert to some traditional conception of manhood, as you sometimes hear people suggest. I'm sure that the people in favor of traditional masculinity espouse some unobjectionable values along the way. I mean, is it better for men to have a sense of purpose in their lives, to have opportunities to demonstrate their worth and contribute to society in meaningful ways? Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's better for everyone's mental health to have a sense of purpose in life. But I think we should pause and ask ourselves what the proponents of traditional conceptions of manhood are asking us to accept as part of the bargain. My worry is that they're too often pushing their audience to adopt a less inclusive version of masculinity, one that's going to ignore or maybe even erase men who aren't straight, aren't cis, aren't white, aren't Christian, or who deviate from the supposed norm in intersectional ways. That's not a bargain I really want to make. I worry furthermore that proponents of traditional manhood are also pushing an implicit corollary, namely that we have to embrace a traditional conception of womanhood too, which in practice would almost certainly mean giving up all the progress of previous decades and would mean resequestering women in some servile domestic sphere and would reassert some ideology of patriarchal dominance. That's definitely not a bargain I want to make. I guess what I'm trying to say is it seems to me that contemporary issues of men and masculinity don't map as neatly as people might like onto entrenched political positions. It would be nice to have spaces beyond partisan politics, beyond culture wars, and beyond ideological axes to grind, where people could more freely explore what it means to be a man in the 21st century. And it might sound a little corny and idealistic, but I'd like to think that Wabash could become an institutional leader for fostering models of positive, healthy, and inclusive masculinity. I mean, you should keep in mind that we are a liberal arts college, and I'm not sure that label has always done us a lot of favors when it comes to recruiting new students. I'm from Kokomo, Indiana myself. I can tell you that there are plenty of people in Kokomo who do not want to spend their hard-earned money to send their kids to an arts college of any sort, much less one that is teaching them liberal arts. There are days when I wake up and I think we could make our lives easier by changing nothing about Wabash and its curriculum, except we just say that we are a conservative skills college for men. Right? That's marketing, that's branding. You give people what they want. We could eventually be the Baja Blast Super Crunch College for men. No, I think my point is we are a liberal arts college, and when we say liberal arts, obviously we don't use liberal in the political sense that people typically use. Liberal in liberal arts has to do with a sense of freedom, that we believe that a broad-based education rooted in humanistic inquiry has the power to be liberating, has the power to free you to do new and exciting things. And let's think then about what it means to be a liberal arts college for men. In the best-case scenario, we could offer a kind of education that liberates us, that frees us from the shackles of tired ways of thinking about men and masculinity, and gives us the space to create something new and present it to the world. So the upshot of all this is just that I think Wabash has an essential role to play in the landscape of higher education and also in the project of producing men who can respond to the needs of the moment and of the 21st century. Given the challenges and struggles that Reeves outlines, our mission, and you know it, I'm not going to say it again, our mission is all the more important and timely. So I hope I've been able to remind you today that even though there are a lot of challenges out there are also many opportunities for us to assert the value and the necessity of our college. Thank you for your attention.